The traitor tried to escape the Deitch private jet, but she killed his empire from the backseat of a car. Roland Sterling had the hard drive, the Mafia's financial blueprint, and a plane waiting on the tarmac. Moretti's men were already there. Bullets were flying outside the armored Maybach. But Penelope stayed locked on her laptop, waiting for one tiny notification. The second it appeared, she wiped the drive and turned their $1,000,000 escape plan into ashes. Let us hit pause on this opening frame together. The lens focuses on Dominic Rossi, a tragic king in charcoal, his poised above a $4.2 billion salvation. This single stroke is meant to wash generations of blood from his family name. The room is suffocating, heavy with breathless tension. Suddenly, heavy oak doors fracture the silence. A terrified accountant stumbles into the den, knuckles white around a red folder, her voice fracturing as she begs him to stop. You would expect the wolf to roar, right? Instead, Dominic goes chillingly still, a quiet that paralyzes the killers beside him. It leaves us with a profound truth. True power never has to shout. The most dangerous weapon a predator wields is the cold, calculated art of absolute unpredictability. Before the blood spills, we must turn our lens to Penelope Hayes. In the sterile, carnivorous world of corporate finance, she survived by blending into the gray walls. Senior partners looked right through her, freezing her out of the golden circles and burying her desk in mountains of raw data simply to crush her spirit. Yet, arrogance always carries a fatal blind spot. By forcing her into the cold dark, they gifted her an extraordinary vigilance. Because no one ever bothered to watch Penelope, they never noticed the quiet, piercing way her eyes tracked their every sin. It is as a haunting reality we often forget. The very people society casts into the deepest shoes are often the only ones left with the clarity to see the monsters lurking in the dark. Penelope did not simply resist numbers, she felt the pulse of their deceit. She tracked, laundered money through empty corporations like a bloodhound in the fog. Picture the framing. A miserable Tuesday, near midnight, heavy rain lashing against the glass of her cubicle. The expansive floor is swallowed in pitch black, saved only by the pale, ghostly glow of her monitor. She is running one final sweep on the Aegis Capital buyout. To the world, Aegis is a titan, but beneath the ink, they were a brutal syndicate. Her quiet, desperate need for the truth is about to pull her into the underworld's crushing gravity. It leaves us with a sobering lesson. Sometimes, performing your duty with too much heart is exact what places the fatal target upon your own back. Stay with me here, because the tragic irony is suffocating. Aegis Capital was a polished, tailored mask hiding the bruised face of the Rossi syndicate. Dominic inherited his father's of violence at 30, spending 5 grueling years trying to scrub the blood from his family crest. This global shipping deal was his desperate grasp at redemption, a chance to finally become a ghost the feds could never touch. And in that very second, and miles away in the rain, exhausted Penelope rubs her stinging eyes and clicks a hidden file. Without knowing it, the gentle accountant has just unlatched the tiger's cage. The lesson echoes through every tragedy. The most monumental, life-altering collisions always happen on the most ordinary, uncelebrated nights of our lives. The human mind is desperate for order, and Penelope's brain was an instrument tuned to perfection. The camera pushes in as she hits a jarring, invisible note. It begins as a faint glitch inside a depreciation schedule for cargo ships docked in Genoa. Any other analyst would have blamed tired eyes and gone home. But Penelope feels the dissonance. Whispering into the dark, she checks the manifests, realizing these massive hulls are not carrying fabric. She splinters the firewalls, bleeding into the raw data. Over 3 agonizing hours, you watch the sheer terror reshape her posture, uncovering a secret darkness enough to sicken a seasoned detective. It serves as a stark warning to us all. The smallest, weakest thread can always unravel the most masterful, meticulously woven deception. The tragedy unfolds on her pale screen. Meridian Logistics is already a corpse, a hollowed shell propped up by billions in concealed rot. And here is the devastating twist of fate. That crushing debt belongs entirely to the Moretti family, the Rossi cartel's most merciless rivals. It is a flawless symphony of corporate murder. If Dominic presses his pen to that paper, he swallows $2 billion in cartel poison and guarantees his own federal indictment. The moment the ink dries, his empire burns and his enemies feast on the ashes. Penelope sits frozen, bathed in the glow of the printer as it spits out this financial death warrant. It is a chilling reminder the most brutal revenge is rarely delivered with a bullet. Sometimes it is buried quietly within the unforgiving fine print. Focus closely on Penelope's trembling frame in this light. She clutches 30 pages of catastrophic ruin to her chest, her rapid heartbeat visibly shaking the lapels of her modest coat. This gentle soul, who spends her quiet weekends baking and watching the rain, is now standing on the precipice of a Mafia war. At dawn, she marches into the glass-walled office of Roland Sterling, a hollow, arrogant man sweating expensive gin. She slams the red folder onto his polished mahogany desk, pleading for him to kill the deal. Yet Roland merely offers a cold, dismissive sneer, completely blind to her panic. He does not even look at the pages. It is a tragic, age-old truth. Boundless pride will always blind a foolish man to the very flames licking at his own front door. Roland was completely blind to the approaching slaughter, mesmerized by the golden glow of a $50 million commission. When ravenous greed takes the wheel, human survival instincts dissolve into dust. Penelope practically weeps, tracing the routing numbers with a shaking finger, trying to show him the Trojan horse. She warns him that if Dominic Rossi signs this trap, the Maniel, he will slaughter them all. But Roland slowly rises, adjusting his silk tie, and speaks down to her with chilling condescension. He reminds her she is just a ghost in the machine, ignorant of how kings play their games. It reveals a deeply painful truth. Trying to save someone who refuses to look at the gathering storm is the absolute fastest way to drown alongside them in the rising water. We have all faced cruelty from those in power, but Roland's malaise is a blade to the ribs. He delivers the crushing blow, ordering her to burn the files and seal her lips, or face ruin. As he brushes past her, Penelope is locked in an agonizing paralysis. The camera lingers on her wide, terrified eyes. She can retreat into her invisible corner and wait for the gunfire. Or she can shatter every quiet rule she has ever known. The moment her trembling fingers close around that red boulder is pure, breathless cinema. Her desperate sprint toward the executive elevator is fueled by the raw terror of a cornered animal choosing to fight. Here is the lesson we must all swallow. Doing the righteous thing is rarely safe, and it almost always demands a moment of absolute, reckless defiance. High above the city, the 50th floor is a cathedral of intimidation designed to crush the spirit. At the head of the dark marble altar sits Dominic Rossi. He lacks the jagged edges of a common thug. Instead, he possesses sharp, aristocratic sorrow and eyes devoid of light, armored in a suit that whispers untouchable authority. Yet, it is not the fabric that suffocates the boardroom. It is the terrifying oceanic calm of a man who knows he holds the breath of everyone in the room. He sits motionless, his pulse as slow and heavy as a predator waiting for the perfect strike. It is a masterful sequence that reminds us of a dark reality. The most devastating threats in this world do not roar at you. They sit perfectly still, watching you in dead, absolute silence. Looming like a gargoyle behind Dominic is Leo Cavallo, his fiercely loyal shadow. If Dominic is the surgical blade, Leo is the blunt force trauma, his face slashed by a scar that maps their violent ascent. Across the cold stone table, Meridian CEO Richard Croft is drowning. Surrounded by sweating lawyers, Croft attempts to project power, but his body language screams of quiet doom. You can see the violent tremor in his hands. His voice cracks under the crushing weight of the room as he forces out a promise that the funds are secured. He is bargaining for his life, desperate to survive the hour. The takeaway is etched into every frame. You can drape yourself in the finest silk, but your trembling hands will always confess your deep, most primal fears. Let us lean in and observe this together, for this is where the dark brilliance of the Rossi bloodline takes over. Dominic locks his hollow, unblinking eyes onto Croft. Born in the shadows, Dominic learned to read the microscopic language of human terror. He senses the sour note in Croft's shifting weight, the desperation in the sudden discounts that defy logic. Dominic's voice drops into a gravelly whisper that makes the air turn to ice. Croft unravels, frantically swearing the sterling and price audit is immaculate. Beside the king, Leo leans down, murmuring dark suspicions in their mother tongue. It is a breathtaking display of intuition that leaves us with a vital rule of survival. No matter how much gold is piled upon the table, never silence the primal warnings of your gut. Without breaking his lethal stare, Dominic murmurs back in Sicilian, rationalizing the fatal gamble. He desperately needs these rusted ports to wash his family clean. Terrified the aging bosses will drag his legacy back into the gutters of street violence. He views himself as a tragic hero, fighting to shatter his father's bloody curse. It is the ultimate delusion, believing a mountain of wealth can simply bury a mountain of sins. As Dominic unscrews his heavy gold pen, the camera sharply cuts to the lobby below. Penelope is a storm of panic, tearing past security, her lungs burning as she shoved toward the elevator doors. The tension is absolutely agonizing. It proves that in the end, fate will always violently orchestrate the collision of two entirely different worlds. Today, you and I are going to step into a scene of pure psychological subjugation. The camera opens on Penelope Hayes, an exhausted accountant, trapped in an elevator climbing 50 floors. She is gasping for breath, clutching a red corporate folder to her chest like a shield. She mutters about health insurance, entirely blind to the fact that she is walking into a monster's den. It feels comical until the crushing reality sets in. Her mind is so deeply poisoned by corporate anxiety that she fears losing her job more than losing her life. It teaches us a brutal, undeniable truth. When the steel doors slide open and you are staring down men with guns, your job, eyed tight, cannot save you. The prey has officially arrived at the predator's doorstep, completely unaware of the dark. Let the camera linger on the guards stationed outside the boardroom. They are not merely muscle, they are the living, breathing extension of a kingpin's terrifying control. Their hands hover casually, concealed weapons silently, promising absolute violence. And then there is Penelope hyperventilating, frantically trying to push past them because of a corporate emergency. Her voice cracks, her nervous system of completely drowning in blind panic. The guards simply cross their arms, deeply amused by this fragile woman stepping into their... They tell her to walk away, but she thinks her spreadsheets actually matter here. It leaves us with a profound realization about human
delusion might feel a warm blanket, but it will absolutely never stop a speeding bullet.
The framing shifts. She stands there, staring at those heavy oak doors, desperately doing the math in her head. If Dominic Rossi signs that contract, he walks straight into a federal snare. The guards give her one final warning before the larger man grabs her arm, squeezing hard enough to leave deep bruises. But watch this moment closely. Pure terror will either freeze you in your tracks, or it will make you do the unthinkable. Penelope has spent her entire life letting stronger people push her around. Not today. Driven by blinding, explosive adrenaline, she takes that red folder and violently smashes it right into the guard's face. You can actually hear the bone shatter. It reveals a dark truth. Sometimes, the only way to break a cycle of abuse is to strike back with absolute force. Before the second guard touches his holster, Penelope throws her entire body weight forward. She breaches those massive mahogany doors, and they bang open with a sound exactly like a gunshot. The entire room instantly freezes, and there he is.
Ultra narcissist, perfectly framed at the head of the table, hovers a single millimeter over the signature line.
Yet the man does not even flinch. His nervous system is so profoundly deadened, it is terrifying. He slowly lifts his dark, empty eyes. Penelope stands there, soaked in rain, chest heaving, gripping the ruined folder. Everyone else is panicking, but Dominic simply watches her. It is a chilling reminder of how the world truly operates. Real power never reacts to chaos. It just quietly observes the storm. You and I need to pause and look at the tragic poetry of what happens next. The rival executive, Richard Croft, turns the color of ash. Penelope screams at Dominic, desperately begging him not to sign the $4.2 billion deal. Instantly, 4 security men draw silenced pistols aiming directly at her chest. The hall guards grab her shoulders, practically aching for the order to snap her neck. And Penelope? She simply squeezes her eyes shut. She delivered her warning, and she is fully prepared to die for it right there on the rug. It is a heartbreaking reality to face. But the moment you completely surrender your own worth, someone else will gladly step in and claim it. That extreme vulnerability is exactly the opening a true predator needs to take absolute control. The camera pushes in tight on her face. She is just standing there waiting for the fatal bullet, absolutely convinced her life is over. But instead of a deafening gunshot, a single voice cuts through the tension. It is not loud. It is this quiet, terrifying whisper of a man who literally holds life and death in his hands. Dominic drops his pen on the marble table with a sharp click that echoes like a judge's final gavel. He stands up, slowly revealing all 6 feet 3 inches of his frame, completely ignoring the armed men. He whispers for them to step back, and they drop her like she is burning hot. It proves a harsh, undeniable truth about human nature. You can always spot the person who truly runs the room, because they are the only one who never has to raise their voice. Notice the lighting shifting as Dominic tells Croft to shut up without even glancing in his direction. It is absolutely chilling. His pitch-black eyes remain entirely fixed on Penelope, scanning her from her ruined, muddy shoes up to her visibly shaking hands. He begins circling that massive marble table with the slow, deliberate grace of a tiger cornering its meal. She can know his crushing physical presence before he even gets close. He stops right in front of her, radiating the scent of bergamot, cold rain, and pure danger. He asks who she is, his voice a smooth, rumbling threat. She swallows her panic and stammers that she is a forensic auditor. Sometimes, the most painful lesson we learn is that speaking the absolute truth to the wrong person is the most dangerous choice of all. Dominic softly mentions that her boss just promised the deal was entirely clean. And right here, Penelope makes a genuinely fatal mistake. Running on pure, unadulterated adrenaline, she snaps, calling her boss a lazy fraud who never reads past the cover page. You can actually feel the air get completely sucked out of the room. Insulting a mob boss's trusted advisor to his face is practically suicide. The guards tense up, ready to end her life. But then the most terrifying thing happens. Dominic actually smiles. It is this tiny, lethal smirk that completely darkens his features. He asks if she is absolutely sure. Penelope, finding comfort in her numbers, confirms it. It is a wild irony of life. Pure competence is a fantastic shield, but in the wrong room, it makes Yeju a permanent captive. The camera tracks her trembling fingers as she shoves that ruined red folder directly into his broad chest. Dominic calmly isolated from her shaking hands. She tells him to flip to page 12 for the freighter schedules and page 14 for the hidden debt. For 30 agonizing seconds, the only sound in the room is the heavy rain violently smashing against the glass. We are watching Penelope watch him. She sees the exact millisecond his ruthless mind puts the terrifying puzzle together. She sees the deep betrayal hit him, followed instantly by the chilling promise of extreme violence. It is a tragic paradox we all must face. The truth will absolutely set you free, but delivering that truth to a dangerous man will tether you to him for the rest of your natural life. Stick with me, because this is the exact frame where the power dynamic permanently flips. A shadow so profoundly dark crosses his face that Penelope actually stumbles backward. The kingpin's massive ego just took a direct hit, and the room scent temperature drops to freezing. He quietly closes the folder. Croft is practically vibrating with sheer panic, his terrified eyes darting toward the exit. Dominic looks at his lead enforcer, his voice totally empty of human emotion, and tells him to lock the doors. That heavy deadbolt sliding into place sounds exactly like a coffin slamming shut. The rival lawyers try to run, but the guards violently shove them down. It is a sobering reminder that when the heavy doors of fate finally lock shut, all your accumulated wealth means absolutely nothing. He picks up that massive $4 billion contract and just stares at Croft, who is ventilating. Dominic softly mentions the $2 billion in cartel debt hidden inside. Set up perfectly for a federal prosecutor to find. Croft starts shrieking, crying, desperately trying to blame Penelope for faking the math. But watch Dominic. He does not yell. He just slowly tears that giant stack of contracts in half, and then in half again. The shredded paper falls like snow onto the black marble. Without ever breaking eye contact with the sobbing executive, he tells his men to take Croft's team down to the soundproof basement. It perfectly illustrates a universal truth. The loudest guy in the room is usually the weakest, while the quietest guy decides who survives the night. Let us look at this tragic moment together and decide if she actually won. Croft is screaming for mercy while massive thugs drag him out, completely ignoring his thrashing. In 5 seconds, the room is empty except for Dominic, his guards, and Penelope. Her adrenaline completely bottoms out. Her knees turn to water. The bitterest part of all? She just saved a Mafia boss and sentenced a group of men to a torture basement. Panicking, she turns to the door, stammering about going back to her cubicle like nothing happened. But his low voice stops her cold. It is the ultimate tragedy of her situation. You simply cannot step into the absolute dark, change all the rules of the game, and still expect to walk those safely back into the light. Her old life is gone. She is his completely now. Let's pause the film right here. He closes the gap until he is standing practically on top of her. Penelope has to crane her neck just to find his dark, endless eyes. He reaches out, and she flinches hard, but his massive hand gently adjusts her crooked glasses, his thumb grazing her wet cheek. It is a calculated move to short-circuit her nervous system, laying the absolute foundation for a tragic trauma bond. He whispers that she just saved his freedom and his entire empire. His heavy gaze drops to her trembling mouth. He asks if she honestly thinks that he would ever let her go back to a boring desk. She mumbles something pathetic about needing to feed her cat. The lesson is brutal but necessary. When a starving shark corners you in the deep water, mentioning your goldfish will not save you. You and I must unpack this tragedy frame by frame. Watch the shadows deepen as that terrifying smile cracks back onto Dominic's lips. He speaks with the cadence of a judge, noting her boss was willing to let him walk into a federal trap, a sin demanding blood, but Penelope, she risked her fragile neck for a stranger. He leans in, his breath grazing her ear, plunging her into paralyzing panic. He whispers that she belongs to him now. Her mind shuts down as she stares into the Vib's dark eyes, finding only absolute certainty. She stammers a breathless excuse about her apartment lease, grasping for her dying reality. The poetic lessons is simple. The strongest cages are rarely forged from iron. They are built the exact second we surrender our free will through the monster to the ancient, stand in front of Ruthless. Linger on the agonizing this irony of this frame. Penelope, an ordinary accountant, desperately tries to enforce civilian boundaries against an apex predator. She clutches at logic, her voice shaking as she claims to be an independent woman. Dominic responds with pure dominance. He uses his massive frame to block out the light, crushing her fragile illusion of safety. He drops the heavy reality on her, revealing the $2 billion loss she just caused his syndicate. He weaponizes the truth to send her spiraling into pure shock. The color instantly drains from her pale cheeks as her nervous system gives out entirely. The life lesson here is as harsh as winter. Logic is a useless shield when you find yourself arguing with a violent force of nature that only respects raw, uncompromising power. The lens captures the tragic shift in her posture when the adrenaline abandons her, leaving her exposed. Penelope is no longer a ghost, she is bleeding bait. Before panic can devour her, the door swings open. Leo steps into the dim light, the focus on the lifeless void in his eyes as he methodically wipes blood from his gold watch. He is a tailored nightmare. Deadpan, he reports their captive finally shattered, confessing to a betrayal within the firm. The twist drops like an anvil. Her own boss, Roland, is the Judas who souls them to the slaughter. The invisible web wraps tighter around her delicate throat. It teaches a heartbreaking lesson about blind trust. Sometimes the person smiling warmly at you is the exact snake's room who threw you to the lions. Watch the agony as realization washes over her trembling features. Roland groomed her for slaughter, using her meek nature as a shield for his crimes. Beside her, Dominic vibrates with a dark rage as reserved for underworld emperors. He barks out lethal orders, then the tragedy twists. Blinded by panic over her abandoned cat, Penelope commits a beautifully insane act. She reaches out and grips the arm of her captor. It is a desperate clawing at the fading illusion of control. In any other dark tale, a kingpin would snap her fragile wrist without a thought. But Dominic freezes. The Titan stops moving, anchored by her trembling touch. The profound lesson here is mesmerizing. Exposing your raw vulnerability will often stop us, a seasoned predator in his tracks, far faster than a loaded weapon ever could. Focus the camera on his eyes. As he stares at her small hand gripping his arm, you witness this terrifying moment. His mind pivots. She is no longer tragic collateral damage. She has instantly become his claimed possession. In a stroke of dark psychological genius, he orders his men to rescue her cat, forging invisible chains of dependency. When an armed enforcer dares to question why a pet belongs in a gang war, Dominic shuts him down. The room's temperature plummets. In this unforgiving underworld, questioning the Emperor is an invitation to the grave. His silent, venomous Glenham glare radiates pure, suffocating dominance. The haunting truth of this world is simple. True power never has to raise its voice to make an entire room hold its breath in absolute terror. The underworld king just drew an irreversible line. She remains by his sides, bound by shadow. As the thug steps back, Dominic executes a twisted move. He removes his heavy wool coat and drapes it over her violently trembling shoulders. To her shattered mind, it feels like a shield. But watch the framing. This is a predator marking his territory. He is drowning her in his scent, severing her from the sunlight of the real world. His hand locks around her arm in an iron grip, guiding her down into a bunker. From the gloom, an army of mercenaries steps into the light. Penelope has crossed the tragic threshold. She is swallowed whole by the Mafia abyss. The lesson here is chilling. Sometimes the very jacket keeping you warm is the exact same net designed to trap your soul forever. The sound design tells the tragic story. Her cheap shoes squeak against the cement, echoing civilian panic amidst a sea of lethal killers. The camera tracks their march toward armored sedans. Dominic shoves her into the center vehicle, sealing them in darkness. The heavy doors engage with a sickening click. In an instant, she is entombed in a silent, leather-lined vault of thick, bulletproof glass. A beautiful, rolling prison. As the motorcade tears into a violent New York thunderstorm, Penelope sits paralyzed by the magnitude of her terror. She grips his massive coat like a drowning sailor clutching a raft. The unforgiving lesson of fate is tragically clear. Survival often forces us to cling to the exact monster who dragged us into the freezing storm in the first place. Stick with me to appreciate the logical color tearing through her mind. Her biggest problem was a spreadsheet. Now she is locked in an armored tank with killers. Dominic watches her nervous system crash. He pours a glass of amber scotch and extends it to her. His tone sounds like a gentle suggestion, but his gaze dictates an absolute order. She rings it. The fiery alcohol sears her throat, forcing her spiraling brain to reboot. It is a brilliantly dark manipulation tactic. In the depths of horror, the human body instinctively accepts whatever medicine the reigning authority provides. The tragic reality is this: trauma makes us terrifyingly easy to control. When you are violently drowning, you will swallow anything just to take one more agonizing breath. The camera captures the agony of her futile negotiations. She is a lamb bargaining with a wolf holding every card. She demands a timeline, clinging to the ghost of her quiet life. She babbles about her mundane routines. Dominic merely glides closer, invading her space with the terrifying gravity only a true villain possesses. His hand reaches out, brushing a wet strand of hair from her pale cheek. It is an intimate, violating gesture. His voice drops to a mesmerizing rumble as he performs verbal surgery on her psyche, severing every tie to her old existence. He mercilessly shatters the illusion that we will ever return home. The tragic truth is that denial acts as a beautiful anesthetic, but it always wears off the exact second the cold blade finally hits the bone. He looks her in the eye, reclassifying her as his property. He promises safety, but the hidden price is total submission. This is the agonizing moment. The twisted roots of a trauma bond break the soil. The car glides to his penthouse, a glass fortress floating above the city. He uses a biometric scanner to unlock the door, a paranoid emperor protecting his spoils. The architecture is weaponized, designed to make her feel entirely insignificant. It is a sickening display of blood-soaked wealth. Bulletproof windows frame the violent storm outside, while the stone floors radiate artificial warmth beneath her trembling feet. He is demonstrating his power to control the climate of her world. The bitter lesson is simple. A golden cage is always a prison, no matter how warm they keep the floor. The luxury is lost on a woman whose mind is shattering. Penelope operates on raw survival instinct. Dominic barks orders at his guards, locking down the perimeter and preparing her gilded cell. He commands her to wash up and wait for him. Dwell on how beautifully twisted that dynamic is. He speaks with the terrifying authority of a warden dictating an inmate's schedule. Her spirit is too drained to mount resistance, so her body goes mercifully numb. The camera tracks her following a man carrying an assault rifle down an endless hallway adorned with priceless art. She drifts like a fragile ghost, wandering through a villain's private museum. The harsh, tragic lesson of survival is this. Sometimes, shutting down and quietly following orders is the only way to keep your broken heart beating until sunrise. The camera captures the heartbreak of her standing beneath the boiling water of a marble shower. She scrubs her skin raw, a visceral reaction to trauma. She desperately tries to wash away the invisible corruption of the underworld, but we know the stain is permanent. In the echoing quiet, her shattered brain finally whispers the impossible truth. She, an invisible accountant, somehow ruined an international crime ring. Stepping out of the steam, her eyes fall upon a set of navy blue silk pajamas folded perfectly on the counter. Here is the terrifying twist of the night. They are tailored precisely to her exact size. The chilling truth of this tragedy is this. True vulnerability is not standing naked in a room. It is the horrific realization that the monster knew your exact measurements long before you ever arrived. Picture the frame. The living room lighting is brutally dim, casting sharp shadows. Getting custom silk pajamas delivered at 2 a.m. proves one terrifying fact. This man has been watching Penelope for months. The moment she slides that silk over her shoulders, she subconsciously surrenders to his control. Yet, the heavy fabric strips away her boring office disguise, forcing her to stand tall. She steps out and finds him pacing. The suit is gone. He wears only a dark shirt, revealing the scarred, violent muscle of a survivor. The corporate mask is dead. The monster breath is in the open. You and I must remember a simple truth. When the villain then finally drops his disguise, you better pray you are not the last one trapped in the room with him. The camera pushes in on his eyes as she walks into the light. He makes no effort to hide the absolute hunger radiating from his gaze. It is a dark, dangerous obsession he kept buried, and the sheer weight of his stare shatters whatever fragile courage Penelope had left. She desperately tries to play the tough negotiator, folding her arms tight across her chest to demand logical answers. Dominic ignores her entirely. His hand grips her shoulder, smoothly forcing her into a leather chair with the cold precision of a police interrogation. He strips away the sugarcoating and tells her flat out that heavily armed hitmen just kicked in her apartment door. The bitter lesson here is profound. Sometimes the answers we angry demand turn out to be the exact nightmares we are trying to create. Let us freeze the reason right here, because this is the exact heartbeat where the steel trap snaps shut forever. He leans over her, delivering the chilling truth that assassins were waiting by her bed. Then, before the terror can even rip a scream from her throat, he softly promises that her cat is completely safe and currently terrorizing his security detail. That violent whiplash of pure relief shatters her last emotional wall. Penelope finally breaks. She sobs helplessly as the suffocating reality of her near death crashes down. And who is there to catch her falling body? The syndicate boss himself. This reveals the darkest lesson of the human mind. When the absolute architect of your nightmare becomes your only safe place to cry, you are never going home again. Watch the blocking in this scene closely. This is the raw book definition of a trauma bond forming before our eyes. Dominic wraps his large hands around her fragile wrists. It paints the illusion of safety, but he is pressing just hard enough to prove he holds the leash. Forcing her chin up, he stares straight into her soul and promises to slaughter the entire Moretti family in 6 months. He is actively cementing himself as her violent savior. Broken by years of feeling invisible, Penelope whispers that she is nothing but an accountant. But here is the tragic truth. A narcissist always needs a shiny mirror. He gently wipes her tear and calls her extraordinary for facing down killers. He only builds her up so he can own her entirely. Notice the terrifying grace in his movements. This is the clinical, calculated stage where he inflates her self-worth, the quietest form of grooming. He praises her sharp mind, pointing out how she caught financial blind spots that 20 elite lawyers completely missed. Penelope attempts to push back, using his first name to stubbornly remind him she is not a doll to be played with. His dark eyes instantly lock onto hers. He calls her an empire builder. It is a stunning, twisted manipulation. He drops a heavy platinum card onto the glass table, crowning her the chief financial officer of his shadow corporation. He promises 50 staff members and absolute freedom. Sometimes, the world is handed to you just to lock the door of a cage you will never try to leave. You and I really need to sit with the dangerous math happening behind Penelope's tear-stained eyes. She stares blindly at that gleaming platinum card, weighing the long years of quiet, crushing abuse from her old boss against this sudden, dizzying rush of authority. She is staring at a dark throne bought with blood money, and the tragic beauty of it? She does not run. Her survival instinct flips a silent switch. She lifts her chin, voice trembling just enough to show she is terrified, and tells him she has rules. Dominic flashes a devastating, ruined smile. He looks exactly like a starving wolf watching a rabbit stroll into his teeth. "Name them, my queen," he whispers. In life, the brightest fires often burn right inside the cages we choose for ourselves. The camera captures him staring with the heavy, unblinking intensity of a starving man discovering his final meal. "Name your conditions," he repeats, wrapping her in smooth Italian endearments that act like velvet ropes tying her down. The irony playing out in this room is brutally sharp. She sits there in silk pajamas, buried deep inside a reinforced Mafia fortress, completely believing a tiny piece of metal gives her the advantage. Yet, for the first time in her miserable life, she refuses to shrink. She forces air into her lungs and lays down her first absolute rule. She will not cook his books. If he wants to wash dirty money, he keeps it far from her clean servers. A terrifying lesson unfolds. Drawing a line in the sand with a monster only tells him where to stand. Her voice rings crystal clear across the silent room. She completely refuses to take the fall on federal racketeering charges for a criminal syndicate. Dominic merely leans back into the dark leather sofa, crossing his massive arms over his chest. He looks entirely relaxed, hiding a smirk because her fragile illusion of control is the most entertaining thing he has seen in years. He agrees instantly. She keeps the clean empire, he manages the dirt. Then she drops her second demand, and you can see the intoxicating rush of power infecting her blood. She demands the absolute right to fire the lazy, privileged kids in his finance department and build her own ruthless team. His dark eyes flash with dangerous amusement. Give someone a little power, and they will always show their true face. She frames this massive power grab as a simple survival attack, looking straight into the eyes of a killer to say she needs total control to keep him out of federal prison. The tragedy is that she is binding their fates together with her own hands. Dominic lowers his voice to a lethal whisper and steps deeply into her personal space. He drags his thumb slowly along her jawline, a deeply calculated touch that sends a visible, violent shiver down her spine. He is silently reminding her that her power only exists because he allows it. Her breath hitches the moment his skin brushes hers. Then, shattering the tension, she demands premium wet food for her cat. A genuine, deep laugh tears out of the untouchable crime boss. Joy can break through even the darkest shadows if you let it. You and I can feel the shock of that warm human laughter echoing against the cold glass of his penthouse. But before the syndicate boss can even process the strange emotion she just pulled out of him, the heavy steel elevator doors slide open. His lethal enforcer, Leo, stalks into the room looking absolutely murderous. Cradled in his massive arms is Penelope's 20-pound orange tabby cat. He glares at his boss, announces the animal bit an armed guard, and drops the cat onto the priceless rug. Penelope gasps, is instantly crashing to her knees. The cat runs straight to her, purring like a rusty engine against her trembling arm. We often cling desperately to tiny fragments of our past, hoping they will somehow capture us. Then the violent reality of the present threatens to swallow us whole. That sweet, fragile moment of domestic peace shatters into a million pieces almost instantly. Leo locks eyes with his boss, and every single trace of warmth drains completely out of Dominic's face. The charming, amused man vanishes, replaced by the dead, empty stare of a ruthless apex predator. Leo delivers the crushing blow. Roland Sterling managed to slip away before the strike team could break his door down. Even worse, they intercepted dark web chatter proving Sterling's downloaded the entire legitimate empire. Every clean business and tax shelter Dominic spent years building is on OneDrive. Now, Sterling is selling it all to the Moretti family. A bitter truth of life is that the ghosts we fail to bury will always return to burn our houses to the ground. Let the camera linger on the absolute nightmare Penelope is processing right now. The silence stretching across the penthouse is thick enough to stop a heart. If the rival family buys those clean financial blueprints, they will trigger federal audits, freeze all the clean money, and destroy the legitimate empire overnight. It would force Dominic straight back into the bloody, chaotic street wars he desperately fought to escape. Dominic dropped his voice to a terrifying, quiet whisper, demanding the location of the exchange. Leo looks sick with rage, admitting they are completely blind. Sterling is hiding behind a heavily encrypted Swiss escrow server, waiting for $15 million to clear. True helplessness is a quiet room where all your power means absolutely nothing. The absolute second that cash clears, the final location gets transmitted. But watch carefully as the entire dynamic of the room flips. Penelope stands up, wearing her silk pajamas like a forged suit of armor. All that brilliant corporate intellect her previous boss tried to crush is suddenly drawn like a sword to protect the very criminal who kidnapped her. She steps directly between these two violent men, demanding details about the Swiss routing. When Leo claims it is completely untraceable, she cuts him off cold. She explains that her old boss is an arrogant creature of habit who never changes his security keys. Without blinking, she demands the fastest computer in the building. Our greatest strength usually hides inside the exact skills the world tried to tell us were worthless. Dominic does not utter a single word.
He merely points towards Leek,
resting on a frosted glass desk. Penelope practically bolts toward it, accompanied by a massive orange cat trotting at her heels like a loyal bodyguard. She sinks into the heavy leather chair, cracking her knuckles with the grim resolve of a soldier, and her hands blur across the keyboard. She effortlessly bypasses the standard systems, ripping straight into a root command terminal. Two incredibly dangerous men stand like statues in the heavy silence behind her, their sharp faces painted by the eerie green glow of the reflecting code. She whispers that Sterling's firewall is a complete joke. In that single breath, the terror vanishes from her eyes. Sometimes true power is not handed to us by others. We discover it at the exact moment we stop running and finally learn to wield the unique weapons we already possess. The lens lingers on her face, capturing the exact moment her quiet knowledge transforms into a loaded weapon. She noticed that she built a secret backdoor into Sterling's servers 3 years ago, just so she could work from home. So 3 minutes is completely fracture the global banking system. She isolates the digital, flooding the Swiss network, locking onto $15 million meant to destroy her new employer. Dominic leans closer, asking if she can pull the plug. Penelope slowly turns her head. A wicked, triumphant smile cuts across her lips. She whispers that she is going to do something much worse. She is rerouting all that cash into a flagged cartel account that Interpol watches day and night. It is a stark reminder that the quietest people often hold the sharpest knives, and sheer intellect will always outmaneuver brute force.
Today, you and I are going to unpack this scene together. Picture the frame freezing right here. Penelope just slammed the enter key, and the monitor flashes a massive compliance hold.
With one automated trigger, she effortlessly freezes $50 million of enemy cash without shedding a single drop of blood. Leo stands half paralyzed in the background, watching a quiet girl financially decimate their greatest rivals. She swivels her chair, her voice totally cold, announcing that Sterling is stranded. The camera shifts to Dominic. His eyes go completely dark with a twisted, obsessive awe. He leans over, trapping her against the edge of the glass desks, and whispers that she is the deadliest weapon he owns. It is a chilling picture, but here is the truth we must face in. Sometimes, the only people who finally recognize your true value are the exact monsters you should be running away from. The scene cuts to the following morning. Golden Manhunter's sunlight violently fights her through the heavy storm clouds, spilling into her massive guest room. But inside, it is utterly dead silent. It is the kind of expensive, soundproof isolation that slowly unravels your mind. Penelope sits up, shoving a tangled mess of hair from her exhausted face as reality hits her like a physical blow. She just crossed a permanent line into the criminal underworld. The tragedy of her situation is a bitter irony we all face eventually. When you finally refuse to make yourself small for people who ignore you, you risk revealing your being to the villains who actually respect you. Suddenly, a sharp knock shatters the quiet, making her a jump. She pulls the heavy silk blanket up like a desperate shield, but the door swings open. Clara, a sharp-eyed woman carrying armfuls of high-end fabrics walks right into the room. The director guides us through a haunting transformation sequence. Clara plainly tells her that she needs armor, not clothing. For 2 agonizing hours, she treats Penelope like a blank canvas, pinning and measuring every trembling inch. Penelope spent her entire life hiding inside cheap, oversized sweaters, hoping nobody would ever notice her. But when she finally stands before the full-length mirror, she actually gasps. She is locked into a custom midnight blue power suit that fits with terrifying mathematical perfection. Her messy hair is now completely sleek, tightly bound, and controlled. This is not just a makeover. This is a complete psychological rewrite playing out in real time. The underlying lesson is chilling. If you wear a heavy mask of absolute power long enough to hide your terror, that mask eventually becomes your real face. There is simply no turning back. Let us look at this piece by piece together, and she steps into black stiletto, shedding her nervous persona to become a lethal weapon. As she walks into the living area, Dominic waits by the elevator in a tailored black suit and a blood-red tie. The man literally freezes. The camera captures him tracking every single sharp line of her new silhouette. His eyes burning with the terrible hunger of a narcissist admiring his own masterpiece. Penelope catches her breath, tragically mistaking her deep, instinctive terror for romantic desire. He murmurs that she is breathtaking, though the words sound far more like a warning than a compliment. He slowly offers his arm. She whispers that she is ready, slipping her trembling hand right into his trap. The harsh truth of this moment is painful. Sometimes the cage is so beautifully decorated, we willingly lock the door ourselves. The camera cuts to the street, framing their corporate arrival, not as a business meeting, but as a calculated military strike. 3 heavily armored trucks roll to a halt outside a massive glass skyscraper. Dominic steps onto the pavement, and the crowded planned street practically parts like the Red Sea. When Penelope emerges next, surrounded by men carrying actual assault rifles, the entire block breaks into nervous whispers. They ascend in silence to the 60th floor. Without a single knock, Dominic kicks the heavy mahogany doors wide open. Inside sit a richest collection of the rich finance executives in the city, with that snake, Gregory Trent, lounging at the head of the table. This scene reveals a very dark truth about human hierarchy. Power is entirely fake. It only exists because we all collectively agree to pretend it does, right up until a monster brings a bigger gun. You remember Trent? He is the smug executive who laughed at Penelope just months ago over some tedious paperwork. Now, the entire room plunges into a suffocating silence the second Dominic's shadow the threshold. His morning greeting is delivered in a voice so terrifyingly cold it could crack ice, forcing a panicked Trent to scramble out of the largest chair. But watch Dominic's body language closely. He does not take the seat. Instead, he pulls the heavy leather chair back and points toward it for Penelope. She takes a shaky breath, wears her new suit like iron armor, and sits at the head of the table. Dominic stands directly behind her, digging his strong hands deep into her shoulders. Do not be fooled by this gesture. He is not being a supportive partner. He is branding his territory before the wolves. Always watch the hands. They reveal who truly owns the room. It is a masterclass in psychological domination. Dominic stares down the row of terrified suits and formally announces that Aegis Capital is under new management, crowning Penelope as the chief financial officer. He declares that a single word from her lips is a direct order from him, softly daring anyone to leave if they object. The silence is absolute, but Trent simply cannot help himself. His fragile, bruised ego completely overrides his basic survival instincts. He sneers across the table, reminding Dominic that she is just a junior auditor from a ruined firm, basically dismissing her as a useless hire. It is agonizing to watch a desperate man dig his own shallow grave. We all know arrogance is just a cheap mask for deep insecurity, but in a locked room filled with organized crime bosses, letting your wounded speak instead of your brain is a completely fatal mistake. You can practically taste the metallic thickening the air. Leo leans against the locked door, grinning like a shark smelling blood. Dominic's hands grip Penelope's shoulders so fiercely he resembles a loaded weapon ready to fire. But pause the scene right here and look at Penelope. She reaches up, gently touches his tense hand, and softly whispers for him to let her handle it. In a single heartbeat, the terrified hostage transforms into the attack dog. She plugs a tablet into the projector screen and locks her cold eyes dead on Trent. With a terrifyingly calm voice, she suggests they review his recent real estate deals. A massive spreadsheet instantly lights up the wall, and Trent's smug expression melts into sheer panic. The lesson is timeless. Never pick a fight with someone who spent Fritz's eyes tire me, finds giant me while you were busy eating. You and I have probably both made the mistake of underestimating the quietest person in the room. Trent definitely did. Penelope swipes her screen, displaying how he purchased 6 warehouses in New Jersey for $40 million. On paper, it looks standard, but she exposes that the tax numbers were completely fabricated. She points out his use of a shell company for the appraisal. Trent begins to sweat, stammering that it is just normal business practice. Then Penelope drops the hammer. Her voice cracks through the room like a whip as she reveals the shell company is registered to his own brother-in-law. He stole $12 million and hid it offshore. The boardroom gasps in horror. It is a beautiful disaster. If you plan to steal from a violent syndicate, never use a trick that a tired accountant can easily unravel before her morning coffee. Watch how the other executives practically throw their chairs backward just to get away from Trent. He is a dead man walking, and nobody wants his blood ruining their suits. Penelope slowly stands up, leaning over the polished mahogany table, exactly like a predator renegade hunting its meal. She looks right through him, coldly explaining that he has been stealing $12 million from the deadliest family in New York, using a financial scam a college freshman could beat. Trent is drenched in cold sweat. He looks at Dominic, begging for his life, swearing Penelope faked the numbers. Dominic does not even raise his voice. He simply speaks Leo's name into the quiet room. The giant enforcer steps forward and violently yanks Trent out of his chair by the collar. Life comes at you incredibly fast. 1 minute, you are the untouchable king of the boardroom, and the next, you are nothing but garbage, waiting for the disposal team. The camera lingers on Leo as a cruel laugh escapes his chest, telling Greg they're about to see exactly what $12 million buys. Trent screams, his fingers leaving bloody trails on the oak door frame until he is dragged into total silence. Amidst the horror, Penelope simply sits. The remaining men stare at her like she is a god of ruin. She folds her hands, asking to review the new protocols with chilling calm. Dominic leans in, his lips brushing her ear to murmur a dark joke about his taxes. It is a masterpiece of psychological troll happening right in front of us. Here is a quiet truth for you and me to remember when we build our walls out of cruelty to stay safe. We inevitably fall deeply in love with the monsters guarding the gates. Before Penelope can process the twisted intimacy of his words, Dominic's phone vibrates. The shift is violently sudden. That possessive warmth drains from his face, leaving nothing but a mask of lethal ice. He dismisses the room in a breath, and the executives nearly crush each other scrambling for their exit. In the heavy silence, Dominic delivers the blow. The bank freeze allowed his team to track Sterling. When she whispers the question of where, Dominic checks the heavy steel of his weapon, naming a private hangar at Teterboro. The polished corporate illusion shatters onto the floor. It serves as a stark lesson for all of us. You can dress your worst impulses in expensive suits and hide them in glass towers, but the beast inside never truly sleeps. It just waits to hunt. The camera tracks Dominic as he turns away. He announces Sterling is fleeing with the drive, ordering Penelope to lock down the floor and stay behind. A boardroom is one thing, but a tarmac gunfight is pure chaos. Yet Penelope does the absolute unthinkable. She steps away from safety, locking her eyes onto his. Her voice does not tremble as she reminds him that only she can wipe those codes. "I go where you go," she demands. Dominic just stares at her, the tragic irony washing over the room. The devil did not force her to become a monster. He merely handed her the keys to the darkness she already held. There is a sobering truth hidden here. We frequently blame the world for the shadows we embrace, completely ignoring how willingly we choose to step straight into the fire. The lens captures the moment he surrenders to her demand. He does not argue. He simply holds out his hand. Penelope takes it, stepping right off the edge into his dark world. Soon, they are tearing through the Lincoln Tunnel at 80 miles per hour, locked in a heavy silence inside the armored convoy. Penelope balances her laptop in the back seat, her fingers striking the keys like a desperate pianist. She knows Roland will avoid public networks. She just needs him to ping a local connection to trigger her kill switch. It is a defense mechanism we all know too well. Let us pause and reflect on this sometimes. Burying ourselves in a task is the only way to survive the terror closing in around us. Intense focus is often just sheer panic wearing a very clever mask. The sharp click of a fresh magazine sliding into Dominic's pistol goes against the heavy air. His eyes are hollow as he orders Penelope to stay perfectly still while he clears the hangar. She must wipe the drive the second her signal hits. The crushing gravity of the impending violence settles on her chest like a weight. They arrive at Hangar 4B, where a private jet screams on the tarmac. But fate always scripts us a bitter tragedy. Dominic is not the first to arrive. Two black luxury cars sit abandoned by the entrance, their doors flung wide open like broken wings. We learn something profound in moments like this. No matter how fast you try to run forward, the darkest parts of your past will always find a way to arrive 5 minutes before you do. The camera snaps to Leo. Spotting the abandoned vehicles, he draws his weapon in a blur. It is Moretti's syndicate. Lorenzo chose the path of blood. Dominic does not even flinch, ordering his driver to punch it. They do not break. Tons of armored steel through the chain link gate in a violent explosion of twisting metal. Before the dust even settles, Dominic is moving, using the heavy doors as shields while automatic gunfire completely shreds the morning quiet. Inside the vehicle, Penelope throws herself against the floorboards, her pulse hammering violently against her ribs. It is a tragic reality of the human condition. We spend years making tiny, seemingly innocent compromises, only to wake up one day desperately dodging the very bullets we unknowingly loaded ourselves. Let us take a step back and examine Penelope. She is entirely consumed by the poison of trauma bonding. She anchors her frantic eyes to the screen, desperate to trick her shattered nervous system by drowning in the cold logic of math. She hunts for a signal. Outside her glass bubble, Dominic moves through the gun smoke like a vengeful spirit. He is no longer a corporate suit. He is a lethal, apex predator, placing 2 flawless rounds into a cartel enforcer without a single shift in his breathing. Through the cracked window, she glimpses Roland, trembling against the fuel drums with the silver briefcase. It reveals a deeply uncomfortable truth about our survival. The terrifying monsters we lie awake fearing are often the very same ones standing between us and absolute ruin. The camera focuses on the shivering executive. Standing over him is Vincent, the ruthless muscle of the Moretis. He grinds the hot barrel of his pistol into Roland's temple. Screaming over the deafening gunfight, Roland is a broken man, weeping uncontrollably about his vanished millions, and this is where the tragedy seals itself. Blinded by animal panic, Roland flips open his laptop to verify the files, unknowingly pinging the private jet's local network. Inside the armored car, Penelope gasps. Her fingers strike the keyboard like lightning, entirely hijacked by survival instinct. It is a bitter lesson for all of us, but terror strips away logic. When blind panic takes control of our minds, we inevitably hand the keys to our own destruction straight to the enemy. Penelope hammers the override command, desperate to prove her worth to her captor. A glowing bar appears, devouring the master directory, 34%. Out on the concrete, Vincent's pace snaps. He violently pistol whips Roland. The crashes down and the encrypted drive skitters across the tarmac. Vincent snatches it up, roaring for his men to retreat. 85%. Penelope whispers frantic prayers to the flickering screen. Vincent pivots to escape, only to freeze instantly. Dominic stands there like a statue of death, his weapon leveled perfectly at Vincent's face and lace. We learn a hard truth. In moments like this, you might be ruthless enough to snatch the prize, but blinding arrogance will always make you forget the bloody toll waiting at the exit. The deafening gunfire bleeds into a terrifying quiet. Dominic's men step from the smoke surrounding the survivors. With a voice as cold as a true sociopath, Dominic orders Vincent to drop it. Vincent just smirks. He holds up the stolen drive like a holy talisman, arrogantly bragging that he holds the blueprint to destroy Dominic's empire. Inside the armored truck, Penelope's screen pulses a brilliant green. The execution is flawless. The hardware is melted into slag. Trembling, she knocks on the bulletproof glass, offering Leo a subtle thumbs up. There is a brutal poetry to this downfall that serves as a warning. Toxic pride makes us wave our winning cards in the air, utterly blind to the tragic fact that someone quietly hiding in the shadows has already flipped the entire table. A terrifying smile pulls at Dominic's mouth. His voice drops to a chilling whisper, asking Vincent if he is truly confident. Vincent glances down. The drive's steady blue light flickers red, spits a tiny spark, and dilated completely. Fried from the inside out, Betty. You can see Vincent's heart stop as he realizes his leverage is now worthless plastic. Dominic stares right through his panic. He casually tells him to let Lorenzo know the audit failed and pulls the trigger.
A single shot rings out. Vincent hits the concrete and the remaining men instantly drop their weapons in surrender.
It is a harsh truth of our existence we must not forget. The exact second you firmly believe you have finally outsmarted fate is the very moment it violently rips the floorboards right out from under you. Roland cradles his shattered jaw on the blood-stained concrete. He stares at the dead enforcer and Dominic's dark silhouette advancing, scrambling backward against the fuel drums. Roland weeps, begs for mercy, swearing his loyalty. Dominic looks down at him with the cold detachment of a man studying a crushed insect. He quietly states Roland is neither loyal nor intelligent, ordering Leo to throw him into the soundproof trunk. Roland will spend his final hours explaining every stolen penny. Dominic walks away, completely devoid of emotion. It is a deeply unsettling reality we all face. Toxic people will relentlessly push your boundaries to the absolute breaking point, only to collapse and play the weeping victim the very second you finally decide to push back. Dominic yanks open the heavy steel door. Penelope is shaking so fiercely she has buried her nails into her palms to keep from shattering. He does not utter a word. He simply pulls her trembling body from the seat, wrapping her tightly in his arms. He buries his face in her hair, smelling of rain and fresh gunpowder. The true tragedy? Penelope clings right back, burying her face into the chest of the deadliest man breathing. This is the exact second the steel trap snaps permanently shut on her heart. The violent storm fades into quiet as they head back to the penthouse. It leaves you and me with one final agonizing lesson. When we are violently drowning in absolute chaos, we will desperately wrap our arms around the very anchor that is pulling us straight down into the dark. Picture the framing. City lights bleed through the glass, casting cold shadows across Penelope. She drowns in oversized cashmere, desperately seeking comfort after the sheer brutality of the mob war she just survived. At her feet, a cat weaves through her legs, oblivious to the spilled blood. The heavy oak door opens, and Dominic steps into the frame. He is scrubbed clean, dressed in dark wool, projecting a terrifying dominance that shatters her last emotional walls. He hands her a glass of 25-year-old scotch, his voice a low rumble confirming their enemies have fled. You and I seize the profound life lesson hidden in this quiet cinematic beat. No matter how much the world burns down around you, the relentless pulse of life simply demands to keep moving forward. The camera lingers on Dominic, his composure like absolute ice. He casually notes they just bled their rivals for $15 million. Penelope stares into her amber drink, knuckles white, desperate to anchor her racing mind to normal business. Dominic shatters that illusion. The original deal is dead. His voice drops to a chilling whisper, revealing they will buy 3 shipping companies and she will draft the takeover. Slowly, Penelope Eater turns, dim lighting catching the raw vulnerability in her eyes. Why trust a complete stranger to rebuild a massive criminal empire? The answer holds a harsh, beautiful life lesson. Real trust is never simply handed over. It is fiercely forged in the scorching fires of mutual destruction. Freeze the frame right here to appreciate the tragic beauty of this scene. Watch Dominic slowly take the glass from Penelope's trembling fingers. He frames her delicate face with heavy hands, forcing a suffocating, inescapable intimacy. Dropping his cold mobster facades, he whispers like people have only seen the monster, the violence. It is a masterful, heart-wrenching play. He tells her she is the only one brave enough to stare down loaded guns just to save his life. Her breath catches in the heavy silence. She weakly protests she was merely doing her job, but he insists she was born for the shadows. The painful life lesson we can all take from this. Sometimes the very people who finally recognize your hidden brilliance are the exact ones quietly planning to weaponize it against you. Noticed the suffocating camera work as this psychological trap closes. Dominic leans in and eclipsing her vision and severing her connection to the normal world. He murmurs that she spent her life shrinking herself so mediocre men could feel powerful, vowing she will never be invisible again. The tragedy hits hard because Penelope actually weeps. finally feeling seen after decades of hiding her genius. Dominic takes her broken pieces and elevates them into a dark religion. When she breathlessly whispers her surrender, the steel jaws of the trap finally lock. His eyes flare with raw, possessive fire. The crucial life lessons we must carry with us. Never let a starving, desperate need for validation blind you to a beautiful cage that was expertly designed to control your every move. He claims he belongs to her, sealing their inescapable fate. Dominic means she will command his Nintensticket while he eliminates anyone blocking her path. The physical collision is desperate, shot with chaotic, overwhelming energy. Penelope grabs his hair, unleashing a lifetime of repressed hunger for dominance. He crushes her against the glass, his body blotting out the city in a bloody baptism. Stick with me, because a smash cut thrusts us 6 months into the future. We are now in a freezing, sterile boardroom, surrounded by elite financial predators waiting for orders. This stark cinematic shift delivers a brilliant life lesson. Visible power can change hands in a fleeting instant, but unbreakable control is always quietly constructed in the deepest shadows. The lighting is clinically white, stripping away the mob romance. No street thugs remain this Penelope's modern army. She commands the room, a lethal weapon in a custom emerald suit. The camera tracks the deliberate pen taps against a dossier. Her voice is freezing as she confirms the ironclad tax shelters and their status as a legitimate empire. The corporate predators erupt into thunderous applause. But look closely at her cold, hollow expression. That is the true cinematic tragedy. Penelope believes she conquered the monster, yet she has entirely mutated into him. It leaves us with a haunting life lesson. The most inescapable prisons are the invisible ones we happily build for ourselves, all while remaining utterly convinced of our own absolute freedom. The camera pulls back for a breathtaking final frame. Dominic lounges in the shadows, indifferent to the clapping executives. His dark eyes remain violently fixated on Penelope. Beneath the cold marble table, his heavy hand closes around her thigh. It is as a possessive strike meant to remind her who truly built the cage. But watch her reaction. Penelope does not tremble. Instead, a wicked, triumphant smirk touches her lip before she effortlessly returns to commanding their empire. The terrified accountant from the first act is dead and buried. In her place sits a ruthless apex predator. The life lesson we take from this ending is grim but undeniably real. Sometimes, the exact toxic environment designed to break your spirit becomes the very forge that teaches you how to conquer the entire game. Before the screen cuts to black, you and I need to debrief. If this psychological dive resonated with you, please leave a like. I genuinely want to hear your thoughts on this beautifully toxic character study, so drop a comment. What was the exact cinematic beat that hooked you? Was it the raw shock of Penelope shattering that guard's nose, or the chilling grace of Dominic destroying his rival without blinking? Share this breakdown with anyone who appreciates the tragic, dark sides of human nature. Make sure to subscribe because we never stop exploring the dark minds in film. As the credits finally roll, hold on to this crucial life lesson. When the plot of your life spirals into sheer chaos, maintaining a cold, observant mind and reading the room will always be your absolute greatest weapon. The story also gives a strong lesson about professional ethics. Roland Sterling represents the danger of greed in business. He is willing to approve a dangerous acquisition because his firm will receive a massive commission. He ignores evidence, dismisses Penelope's warning, and places other people's lives and futures at risk. His failure is not only financial, it is moral. Penelope, on the other hand, understands that numbers are not just numbers. Behind every contract, audit, and spreadsheet are real consequences. If Dominic signs the deal, people may go to prison, businesses may collapse, and violence may follow. Penelope chooses responsibility over personal safety and career comfort.
This is an important educational message for studying this law or management.
Professional knowledge must be guided by ethics. A person who is skilled but dishonest can create enormous damage. A person who is honest and skilled can protect others from disaster. The story reminds viewers that success built on lies is unstable. Roland has wealth, influence, and reputation, but he loses everything because he betrays truth. Penelope may begin with little power, but her ethical choices earn trust and authority. This contrast teaches that integrity is a long-term investment. In real life, people may face pressure to hide mistakes, approve false reports, ignore warning signs, or follow unethical orders from superiors. This story encourages people to ask, what is right, even if it costs me? That question is central to moral education. The lesson is clear. Money can buy influence, but one cannot replace honesty. A career without ethics is dangerous, but a career built on truth can become a force for protection and justice.